Hello and welcome to the very final COVID-19 press briefing. I'm delighted to announce that as of the 19th of July, the COVID-19 pandemic is officially over because we say it is. I'm bored of it, that's why Rishi doesn't want to spend any more money. Let's just say Matt's political career has gone to the big Department of Health and Social Care corridor in the sky. We've vaccinated the entire British population, except for all the people we haven't vaccinated. If there's one thing, if you're a red wall voter, a blue wall voter, a gammon, or a woke liberal metropolitan elite, if there's one thing we can all agree on, it's that football is coming home, but also that we're all bored of the pandemic. Do people even really care about the NHS? Surely after the tragedy of the last year, we've all been somewhat desensitized to the idea of hundreds of preventable deaths per week. What people really want is to go on holiday. Just look at the graph of the cases. It's basically gone. So let's all just agree together that the COVID-19 pandemic is over. It's finished. We can stop talking about it. Taking question now from the one journalist who actually gives a shit.
Prime Minister, that graph you just showed us was on its side. In fact, I would say the entire government strategy is practically upside down. We've just spent 15 months of our lives fighting this virus. We've gone into lockdown 3 times, people have worked from home, kids have missed school, billions of pounds of public money has been spent, and now we're just turning around and throwing all of that away? Bear in mind, 13% of adults over 18 haven't yet received their first dose, 35% are yet to receive their second, and that's not even mentioning the entire population of under 18s who could still catch it and spread it. Sure, they don't usually die of the damn thing, but we don't know what the long-term impact of long COVID might be. We might be harming an entire generation for life. And think of all the disabled people, all of the vulnerable people. Sorry, Prime Minister?
It's coming home. It's coming. Football's coming home. It's coming home. It's coming home. It's coming. Hello and welcome to the David Frankal Show, my weekly show which I make every week. This is my college room, which I don't think has ever actually featured in an episode of the Dave Frankal Show before, although you might recognise it from train news. I should have moved out of here a week ago, so you're probably wondering why I'm still here. The answer is because after successfully avoiding it for a year and a half, I've finally managed to go and catch coronavirus. I'm happy to report I'm completely fine. I'm over the actual illness. I'm just waiting for my 10 days of isolation to finish. To be honest, it's a miracle that I've managed to last this long. It's probably a testament to just how antisocial I am, but to be perfectly honest, and this is not so much a criticism of the university or the college specifically, who have put in a lot of hard work, but as a general point, if I were to put together a crack team of people to design an environment to maximise the spread of a viral, airborne, infectious illness as quickly as possible, they probably couldn't do much better than just reinvent the university halls of residence. In hindsight, sending us back here last September, especially when there was no asymptomatic testing available, was probably the worst public health decision any ever made in UK higher education. And all of that for what? We were promised blended learning. We ended up having an online course. This year, this entire academic year, I have had one in-person tutorial session. Everything else, lectures, tutorials, group sessions, and the exams themselves have all been online. I've been able to use the library to borrow paper books from and actually go and work in there for a bit of scenery, but apart from that, there's been absolutely no point being on campus at all. Most students chose to come back here just to be social. I'm mainly here because I didn't have a permanent UK address I could have gone back to. Since my family were out in Oman, and I did actually end up spending about 3 months there when I went for the winter holidays and just stayed there for a bit. I had been planning to come back about April anyway, as the UK's third lockdown was starting to ease, but I ended up coming back slightly earlier than planned in mid-March, when it was announced that Oman was going to be added to the UK's red list, which means if I didn't come home straight away, I'd have had to go to a hotel for 10 days to sort of quarantine institutionally, which I thought probably wasn't for me, so I came back just in time and just quarantined myself at home here in college for 10 days instead. I had been hoping that as lockdown eased and the academic year came to an end, things would pick up a bit, things would be a bit more social, I'd get to meet more people, but in reality none of that has happened. I've met a couple of nice people. I don't want to sound like I'm complaining too much, because, you know, I mean, I'm safe, I'm well, I've met a couple of nice people, you know, I have made some friends, but to say the least, I haven't had anything close to resembling what a normal first year at university should be like. But anyway, that's quite enough feeling sorry for myself. I really can't complain that much. I basically had a massive extended holiday instead of the third lockdown. So in the days after the last episode of the David Frankal Show went out at the end of 2020, beginning of 2021, the UK announced it was going back into lockdown, so I didn't rush back from Oman to the UK. Instead, I just stayed there for basically all of January, February and early March and just had a very long holiday while studying my course online with my family. We got to enjoy the freedom to go out to restaurants and actually see the country. I mean, out of all the places in the world to get stuck, Oman is probably the most beautiful. I mean, pearly white sand, beaches, you know, endless stretching deserts, jagged mountains. It really is spectacular.
Even like doctors have to get trained abroad, and they passed regulation a year or two ago that they have to be trained in an English language.
So here we are in the desert. It's a proper desert. There's our campsite and then nothing. The lone and level sands stretch away.
And I told you we will look at it from this view.
Also, in the time since January 2021, I've pretty much cleared all that was left of the big gap year video backlog. One thing I do have left is all the footage I filmed in Oman, which I'm not really sure what to do with. I was thinking of turning it into like a series of short videos. Would that be something you'd be interested in? Let me know in the comments. So I came back to the UK in mid-March. To be honest, I spent most of that time sat here in my room in Durham doing not much, but I did go back to Manchester a few times to see some friends. I also met up with Jen, as in Jen on the Move. We cycled some disused railways of Manchester together, and we put together a couple of videos which you should definitely go watch. I also went down to Bristol to see some friends, including one friend I haven't seen in literally 13 years. Oh, do you remember the Edward Colston statue that got toppled about a year ago? So I happened to be in Bristol on the 1 year anniversary of that happening. So I went to see the old plinth where the statue used to stand. You can go see the point where the statue was thrown into the quay. Someone's put up a little plaque there to commemorate the event. And of course you can now go and see the statue itself on display at the M-Shed Museum as it was when they fished it out with all the graffiti and all that. And as I happened to be walking past the plinth on the evening of the first anniversary of this happening, well, this happened.
Get him in the head. Give me a whack, mate. With your heart. Boy! That was a love tap, man.
I also explored Bath and Cardiff while I was down there, and because I had time to kill and nothing better to do, I took the train all the way down to see the Royal Albert Bridge on the border between Devon and Cornwall, and also Dawlish, which has been on my list for a very long time. All of that involved quite a lot of long-distance trains, which I've definitely missed in lockdown, and also whilst in Oman, because Oman doesn't have any trains. Well, mostly. I won't be going back to Oman though, because as of filming, my parents and Noam have now left Oman for good, closing that slightly chaotic and carbon-intensive chapter of all of our lives. So I've just gone back and watched the last few episodes of the David Frankal Show from earlier on in the pandemic when I was, discussing what had gone well, what had gone wrong. And to be honest, I think I've been way too generous with the government and sort of giving them the benefit of the doubt over just how badly they fucked the response to the pandemic. I think part of the reason is, like a lot of people at the beginning of lockdown, I was scared. I didn't know what the government should have done. And although I've never trusted Boris Johnson particularly, I did have a lot of trust in, the guys who stood next to him in the press conferences who were supposed to know what they were talking about. So I was just a bit too generous with them, I think. The truth is, the UK government have never had a clue what they were doing at all. They have been completely making it up as they go along since March 2020. I mean, 3 times now we've gone into lockdown, 3 times we've seen cases rise quickly, hospitalisations rise quickly, deaths rise quickly. The trajectory was clear, it was absolutely obvious to everybody that lockdown was inevitable, and yet 3 times they made the same mistake of waiting and seeing, letting the situation get worse, and frankly letting more people die than was necessary before taking what was obviously the necessary action, which was locking the country down. I mean, just last January when the Alpha variant was spreading all over the country and we had this back and forth about whether schools would open or not, the government ended up sending all primary school children outside of London back to school for 1 day, insisting that it was safe, before that very same Monday evening announcing that all the schools were to close. I mean, that utterly incompetent incident alone should have triggered the entire government to resign, quite frankly. You could accuse the people criticising the government of, oh, you're just political point scoring, but it's not just political point scoring. This is literally a matter of life and death. People have literally died because of bad decisions the government have taken. Alright, so when COVID-19 first appeared, it was a genuinely new threat. There was no precedent for lockdown, there was no precedent for any of this. So, maybe, arguably, you can, even if you forgive the government for every single mistake they made during the first wave, including discharging care home patients from hospitals to care homes without testing them, even if you forgave all of that, this time last year the death toll stood at about 40,000 in the UK. It's now 128,000. Nearly 90,000 deaths, that's over 2/3 of the entire UK death toll from this pandemic, have occurred since last summer. By which time we had mass testing, we had precedent for lockdown, we had monitoring, we had a £37 billion test and trace system. You cannot use the excuse that the pandemic was novel at that point. They had the precedent for locking down, we had the clear indication that actually preemptive action is both better for saving lives and the economy. So what happened in September, October, and again in December, January, can only be explained by sheer, utter incompetence and negligence, and the result being tens of thousands of avoidable deaths. So where does that leave us now? Well, cases are once again rising very quickly as the UK enters its 4th COVID wave, although, as the majority of adults, especially the older adults, have now been vaccinated, the link between cases and hospitalisations and deaths has very thankfully been broken. That's genuinely good news, but it still doesn't mean that we should completely just ignore this. It's a bit worrying to me that, as of filming, the government is still pressing ahead with lifting all coronavirus restrictions on the 19th of July, including wearing masks indoors in shops and on public transport, which just seems bizarre to me. I mean, I can understand why you would want to get rid of the restrictions that are holding the economy back, that are restricting people's lives, social gathering limits is genuine restriction on our liberty. I understand that, but wearing masks on buses and trams and trains is really none of those things. To me, it seems like an added layer of protection that comes with virtually zero economic or social cost. And as more and more people use public transport, I think it's a really pragmatic way of keeping public transport as safe as possible for as many people as possible. What good reason is there to lift mask mandates on public transport now? None. So what else is new in the world of British politics? Well, we've all seen the photos of Matt Hancock snogging his aide, and I think all the jokes have been made, so I will spare your eyes this time. I just think it's very funny that somebody had to resign from Boris Johnson's cabinet for having an affair. Obviously, there is a lot of public interest to this story as well, at the time, you know, Matt Hancock was breaking social distancing rules, which he was at the time imposing on the rest of the population, which is pretty hypocritical. Also, there is a clear conflict of interest with this being an aide who worked for the Department of Health and Social Care on a taxpayer-funded wage and all of that. But to be honest, if there is one cabinet member who should not have survived the last year, it is Gavin Williamson. And you know me, you've seen my show before, you know how much I've ranted about how incompetent Chris Grayling was in his time in Transport Secretary, so you know what I'm about to say carries a lot of weight. But Gavin Williamson is the most incompetent minister this country has had in living memory. He has just survived far too many career-ending scandals, especially if you consider the fact that he actually was sacked by Theresa May for leaking matters of national security in May 2019, before then reappearing in the cabinet like 2.5 months later as Education Secretary when Boris Johnson showed up. I mean, British politics is just so utterly broken. Like, that should never happen. If you get sacked from cabinet for leaking national security, you should never stand in any ministerial office again. And yet, despite that, Gavin Williamson has carried on merrily failing upwards through the GCSE A-level algorithm fiasco. Let's just say it was the May 2018 timetable change of exam results. I think my favourite one, though, has to be suing a London council for trying to close schools during a major coronavirus outbreak before, like, 2 weeks later the government announced all schools in London would close. Just real great governance. Brilliant, that. Well done. To be honest, the only cabinet minister who's not been a complete disaster in the last year has actually been Grant Shapps. I mean, I'm not saying I love him, but maybe I'm just feeling the effect of his predecessor setting the bar so low, but he seems kind of not useless. And you know, like the contents of the Williams-Shapps plan for rail are kind of sensible. Am I being too nice here? Feel free to start a flame war in the comments below. Does Grant Shapps suck? Oh yeah, and Dominic Cummings also came back from the dead to sit in front of a parliamentary select committee for 7 hours and just tell us a bunch of shit we already knew. Like, oh yeah, the government screwed up the pandemic. Well, you don't say, Dominic. I mean, yeah, okay, some of the stuff he said is pretty damning, but you look where it's coming from. I mean, it's coming from a man who was sacked from that cabinet. I mean, the motive here is pretty transparent. You know, if you think you've redeemed yourself by spilling a bunch of gossip about how terrible the cabinet, which you were a part of, was back last year, then I think you're sorely mistaken. So back into the dustbin of history you go. As for Keir Starmer, I think it's fair to say his opposition in the last year has been pretty underwhelming. I know I said this time last year I was saying, oh yeah, you know, it's a national emergency, party politics has been suspended, you know, Keir Starmer's right to pull his punches like at the very beginning of the pandemic, and I'm not saying I don't stand by that, but I think the time for political unity has long since passed. The government have made far too many mistakes, far too many bad decisions, quite frankly, to not attack them at this point, and I don't think there is any reason for Labour to be pulling its punches at the moment, and yet Keir Starmer has just been very quiet and very kind of, don't do that, that's bad, you know, like, I say this as somebody who generally has supported Starmer and is on that kind of part of the political spectrum. I don't know what his vision for the future of the UK is. And apparently a lot of the UK electorate agree with me, because Labour did not do particularly well at the local council elections on the 6th of May. They did better in some of the mayoral elections, winning Manchester and London by big margins, and also West Yorkshire, which had its first mayoral election. Labour did lose Hartlepool to the Tories, which is not particularly surprising if you put it in the context of the 2019 general election, but had you said that 5 years ago, it would have been pretty unimaginable. It's not all been good news for the Tories though. The Lib Dems and the Greens both did very well at the council elections. The Tories also lost 2 parliamentary by-elections, Cheshire and Amersham to the Lib Dems, which was a big upset, and also narrowly lost Batley and Spen to Labour. So party politics is still alive and well. I think that's a good note to end on. Hopefully the next episode won't be in another 6 months. I don't really know what I'm going to do this summer. Hopefully, I mean, I don't know if I'm going to be able to travel abroad or not, hopefully I will, but if not, I will make more UK-based content instead. So if you have any suggestions for places I should go, or people I should collaborate with, let me know in the comments. One thing that will start appearing soon is Lost Railways of Durham. This week's train spot of the week is a Transpennine Express Class 802 arriving into Durham to take me home to Manchester. If you've enjoyed this video, please subscribe and thank you for watching.